Okay, this is the bonus part of Fantasy Hand, in which I'm going to put a skeleton inside here very quickly, very simply, not for final animation use, but just to pose the hand. This part is entirely optional to you. If you have time to do it, you can get something more than just a outstretched neutral pose for the hand. And that is the best position, and why we modeled it so that we can fit easily bones inside with the fingers slightly splayed without fingers being too outstretched or too curled. Something like this would be perfect, and is why you photographed your hand that way and hopefully modeled it similarly. Here we go. First is just a bit of organization. I'm going to go to the outliner and select all these feathers and put them on its own layer. Here I'm hitting 4. I already did that. That's why that's colored red. So in the outliner now, this is the best place to find in the menu all the name items that you created ever since the first you opened Maya for your project. It's going to be here unless you deleted it. So it's a very quick list version of it. So I'm going to go for all those strokes and put it on a layer right here, which I did already, and I named it feathers, and then I selected the hand mesh, just a hand mesh, and created another layer by hitting that one and creating fantasy hand layer. And then I did give it a little bit of color. If you double click on the color box, you can give it a color. It's a good habit to distinguish things if you are gathering some clutter in the mesh or paint effects or other things in your scene, and then turn them off, because I'm going to turn the feathers off. So I just see the hand and I can focus on my skeleton. Now I'm going to start adding bones into the hand, and I'll just start by drawing a skeleton for this. This is minimal rigging. We're not going to get very deep in at all, just to be able to pose the hand. By the way, you should go into all your other views and turn off things that they don't need to be there. Of course, image planes, you're well done with those. I wouldn't delete them just in case you need them back, but if there's image planes present, just go to show. We don't need to see any of those lights taken away and other stuff we can this can work in the same way that layers work. It's just up to your preference, but we really want to focus only on the mesh. And here again, always kind of clean up our workspace, and surprising how fast workflow goes if you don't have any clutter. So I'm going to go into my rigging menu up there. We'll have skeleton, where we can click create joints. Okay, so I have this tool loaded to create joints. Should not be drawn in perspective view, same as if I'm modeling. Let's do this in a flat view, and I'll start with the front view. I could start in the side view too, but this is what I want to do. Starting at the base, I'm going to hit 4 and turn on the grid so I can see what I'm doing a little bit, and start drawing the root of the skeleton right here at the edge of the wrist. Okay, that's a pretty nice size joint, and I'm going to click about there, go there, and going outward like that. All right. Before I go further, if your joint size is really smaller than this, let's highlight it so you see it. I'm just hitting the up arrow. You can adjust that joint size. Say it comes in too skinny like this. Say you're drawing joints and they look really thin, or maybe they look too fat like this, and it looks distorted. You could go up to adjust the joint size. That's why you should model about the size of a 20 or 30 grid. So if you go under display, animation, joint size, menu pops, and you can adjust it to, it should look something like that. Now, you're not doing every bone of what you think the skeleton of the hand is. This is just to get into pose and everywhere you think it's going to bend. So I'm going to go click there, and maybe more like this. And I know it's going to branch out to the thumb like that. Okay, now if you hit the up arrow, it's going to highlight everything so you can see it better. Let's see what it looks like in what's called a hypergraph, where you can see everything connected. Going up to Windows, and we're going to choose the general editors, and we're going to grab the hypergraph. Oops. Okay, this is good to know, because you see, just like the outliner, everything kind of like the DNA of everything in the form of your scene in Maya, but even better, this shows the parenting, if everything's connected to something else. So we'll talk about parenting and connection a little bit more later. But as you draw joints, it is in the stair step. You could see that this is a hierarchical, like a family tree. This is the master parent, everything on top. And this is the second generation, third generation, fourth generation of the children. Why do you have to know that? It will come into play much later. If you ever start rigging, it's essential to know. Or things with mechanical parts that all have to interrelate and interlock and rotate on their own and all together at other times. You absolutely have to know hierarchy. And this is what this hypergraph hierarchy does. It shows you everything that the outliner does, but it shows you the actual connections of everything and its parental relationships. Pretty easy to demonstrate. If you select joint 1 and you rotate it, everything below it rotates. So that's like you're taking the great-grandparent and moving all the children that go with it. If I go one step down, let's turn off this so you can see it better. That's the grandparent. You're rotating it. This could be the parent, and it only moves the child, and then the child, if only selected, only the child moves. That's the logic that goes through all of CGI and all of hierarchy to make things interconnected, and it's a dependency. It puts nodes on a dependency that make them be able to operate at all in the correct way when you're animating. Since it's a modeling class, that's all you have to know pretty much at this point, but as we build a skeleton, you should be sensitive to that. All right, this is what we built so far in the front view. Before we build out any more of the skeleton, let's go to the side. Looking in the side view and then a hypergraph, we're going to see how that positions, and we're going to place it a little bit better. And note again, you can hit the up arrow and you're going up the hierarchy. That's jumping up the chain in hierarchy. If you had the hypergraph open, you can see what that is doing by, I'm just hitting the up arrow on the keyboard right now, just hitting the up arrow, and it jumps to the great grandparent here. Kind of like modeling, you got to make sure that skeleton so far fits in pretty well the front and the side view. Its exact number of bones that you put in has to do with your fantasy hand. You just have to put one there at least, here where the wrist bends, about here where the middle of the hand is, and then you can start fanning out to the other fingers right about here. So I'll do that. So if you click on the last joint that you drew with the joint draw tool, it takes a little practice, it activates it, and then when you continue drawing, clicking the last joint you want to start with, and that becomes the first joint as you draw, and it continues that skeleton. And then you just click the last one, the last joint you want to continue, and then I'm going to put, and I'm going to use my actually move tool. It's a big difference to try to get the bones to fall roughly inside like this. Then you could probably look at the perspective view and just use X-ray to check it out. You're just making sure your bones so far, don't draw all too much. You're doing just one like limb, or I should say one kind of branching out part of the skeleton at a time, all coming out from like a tree. It's sprouting out from a base joint. This is called the root joint. This is the next one. And as hierarchy goes, it's fanning out into the smaller branches. So just like our skeleton that's in our own bodies, that's similar to the way you're going to draw it, but far fewer bones. Okay, looks good for the thumb. Now I'm going to fan out to do all the rest of the fingers. Grabbing that joint tool, and I'm going to select that one to activate it with the joint tool. That means when I draw another click, it's going to continue that skeleton. All right. This is what it's starting to look like in the hypergraph hierarchy. Should make some sense. Okay, might as well draw the rest of the fingers, sprouting, and then finish them. Same, joint tool, joint you want to activate and continue, then draw. And it connects it in 1, Connected hierarchy, it connects it for you. And continuing. For the middle finger, I'm going to click off first. You can just hit the Y key to deactivate. Something is activated to deactivate it. Yes, you can hit return, but the Y key is the official Y key to deactivate anything. So I moved over a little bit to it. So you click it and continue the skeleton. Y key. Let's do that again. Make sure you have that joint tool activated, or you could hit the G to repeat last tool. Click it. Then it's already activated, and click that to continue it. That looks good. Let's check it out in the side view. Okay, looking at the side view, appears that they're pretty well placed. Maybe not that much moving involved. Just a bit. And let's have a glance in the perspective that has X-ray through it. Not too bad. Maybe this could be a little bit. And if you want to change any of the joint sizes, you could use the display scale that I showed you. Do it that way. It can be done individualistically. This round ball here, that's considered the joint. This part right here that connects between it is considered the bone. And you get the bones automatically when you draw 2 or more joints. So really you're drawing with joints. When you draw a skeleton, you're not drawing with bones. The bones happen automatically between it. Now I'm going to draw out the rest of the fingers in the skeleton, similar to the thumb. Let's go clicking, start index, and I'll put a joint right where I drew a knuckle. I modeled it like that, and one. I'll save that for the side view. Hitting Y to cancel the not to cancel, but to deselect. We are in the side view, and I'm going to position that better. It's hard to see now, but I'm aiming for the index finger. You can check in the perspective view, see how it looks. This one, not too bad. Now you want to give it a little bit of a natural curl. It shouldn't be totally straight. That's why your hands and your fingers were a little bit relaxed, because that's going to give a better result when we pose or when we animate. We don't want it certainly like this, overextended, even if it wasn't popping out of the skin. But an animation, say if we were going to model for an animator, and that's what everything we're aiming for, is that we have a natural curve, slightly bent like this, so it's going to anticipate the forward motion, because our fingers really don't bend backwards. Unless you're double jointed, they curl forward. So we have to introduce a little bit of that curl when we draw a skeleton like that. And hopefully that's already built in the mesh, which it is. All right, I'm going to do the rest of the fingers, which is pretty elemental, and pause. Okay, I finished drawing the whole skeleton for the hand. Mine will be very different from yours. Again, I have these long nails. Maybe you have different types of extrusions, or not appendages, but modifications that require you to draw. What you're aiming for is to have a bone following most of the material of your mesh, because it's got to control that, and that when we bind it, the bones are only going to control what's in proximity. So if this bone for some reason is closer to that material, that mesh is going to start to attract it when we bind it, and it's going to distort it. So there's ways to fix it, but it's pretty laborious. So drawing an adequate skeleton in the first place is going to save you a ton of work. All right, let's just take it off that surface and see what our plain skeleton looks like. Just awfully claw-like, just as a skeleton. And I think we're ready just to bind it and give it a try. Now, it could be a lot easier, because in my skeleton I have all these feathers that are probably going to have to follow with it, so it's going to be really heavy going. I want to save it in case it crashes. If it were just this hand, I'm going to bind it, it would perform a little bit easier. But we're also going to bind all the geometry of the feathers too, which might get kind of crashy, let's say, heavy. So I'm going to be sure to save it, probably as a different version now. Okay, I'm just about ready to bind. Now, I have all these feathers in here, which I'm going to get rid of the strokes, if they did not go away with your delete history because they're part of their own thing, they're not really a part of the hand mesh, they're not mesh, they're strokes. We converted them to polygons here. So first of all, in the outliner, let's just get rid of all those stroke feathers, not to confuse us. There we go. All right, so this is the way it works. We're going to first select the joint. This is the outliner, and this is the parent joint, or the master parent joint. So that's the first thing you grab. Then I'm going to, as it's going in the outliner down to up, I'm going to command select. I want to select all those feathers, so keep holding command and then add shift and add the rest of the feathers. There, we got them all. And lastly, holding now just command, select the poly surface, because I know that's the hand, the fantasy hand mesh. So just look at outliner. What's highlighted blue is what I got. The first thing I selected, the joint, the very highest parent, and that's called the root. Make sure you have that selected, then all of the other children joints are selected, and then all of the mesh that's, or the feathers, or anything that's going to be controlled by the skeleton. All right, make sure you got that right or this won't work. Now we're going to bind, and you got to be in rigging. You go bind, skeleton, we're going to skin, and then bind skin. Make sure you save it before this. This can easily crash because of the heaviness of all that geometry. So I'm going to click bind skin, and it's going to take a bit to calculate, so just let's wait for it and see if it doesn't crash. Okay, it did take a minute, but it did it. So we have now the influence of these joints over the skin, over the mesh, and over the feathers. You could see that the joints have been color coded. That has to do with the surface of the vertices, how they get affected. You see they're colored, the vertices are colored as well. And it's telling you, it's color coding the bone, telling you what bone is influencing the CVs around it. And that's the way animation works. 3D animation is the bones control the character, move limbs, move fingers, move etc., even hair and props and stuff. And the bones are ascribed to proximity. Whatever the CVs are near it, it's going to move those CVs. And it blends between the influence of areas, so it color codes those areas. It'll make more sense if you do more rigging. Anyhow, I'm going to start trying some poses with this. Make the feathers and the fantasy hand a reference layer so it can't be selected, and I can only select the finger. Let's see if how it's doing. So it's bending. All right, let's take off X-ray to see it more clearly. And now without X-ray, it's hard to see inside it, see the bones, so we can pop open the outliner or the hypergraph, whatever you prefer here. I'm going to use hypergraph and just test some of these bones, see how it affects. It's kind of like bending the whole hand down. You can see which bones inside it's affecting the feathers. Now this is slow going because, of course, the feathers have so much density to them, a high amount of CVs. This would not be the way to go for a game, or certainly other applications, even for a film. And I will show you ways to create feather-like things and hair-like things using transparency maps and not using paint effects. This is a quick way to go, paint effects, just to get a look for something, but it's not very efficient. This would be way too slow interactions for other applications, so I'll show you that later in other projects. It would have been a really good idea to go in and name all the joints so we know what's what. I know this is the middle finger here I'm arranging, so I can really get an interesting pose. This one is the ring finger. Using just selecting joints here. Now, if this were a complete character to be animated, we would have another level of creating constraints. And constraints are time consuming to set up, but there would be the correct thing to select. And we wouldn't go in here as an animator, put poses or animation keys on these joints directly. That would just be too cumbersome and actually dangerous, because you can actually hit something you don't want. But with using constraints, and maybe you've seen a rig before that uses constraints, those are those NURBS curves or circles that surround a character's limbs or neck, or maybe the bottom of the character, to control a whole system of joints, and it prevents you from selecting other parts of the mesh and damaging it. If you want, you can conceptualize a new position of the hand and render it again in Arnold for a bonus. But this is just an example of how you'd pose it if you'd want to. That's extracurricular to the assignment. Okay, maybe I'll do like the devil horns kind of finger position here as a pose. So the index finger up, the pinky up. And something like that. You can easily see how you can overstretch it, and it won't look good. I think you know what going for this hand pose. Something like this. Splay the fingers out like that if you like. Index finger, thumb. You turn it any way you want. And I'm moving the joints. I can't see them inside, but they are there. It just doesn't look very pretty to see. So equally, you could probably use the outliner to control these. Or you could hit 4 and see right through the skin. Okay, I'll probably stop there. So just to show you an example how to get a skeleton inside something just for posing. This would not yet be good for animation, but it's on its way. We're focusing in this course on only modeling, but modeling for animation. So it's a good prognosis to know how you have to model to put in joints and have it be amenable to that, and actually be ready to put a skeleton system in and put a quick pose on something. Find an alternate position, any sort of hand position you want to put it in, and it's all ready for a render as you set up all the lights, all the Arnold already, and just do a new render, see what it looks like. Okay, here's a render from this angle, and this shadow right here I feel is a little bit dark. If you did turn on shadows in your lights, and maybe you've just noticed this or just learning it, you can go to the light itself that is casting that shadow. That says point light selected, and open the submenu, shadow color. Here I have the Arnold Interactive Render selected. I can change the shadow color, and it's going to update the color of the shadow. Maybe I'll do a little bit of a warmer shadow, like that, and maybe even lighter. Okay. I thought it was getting a little bit dark at the bottom of the hand, so I put this extra little point light to catch some light down here. Maybe give it a little splash of color. Trying some reddish, maybe a little bit of ghoulish looking tone or hue. I'm going to center that in the 2K square and give that a render. I'll go this time, instead of the test size resolution of 25%, I'll go to the full render settings of 2K square, which is 2048 by 2048. All right, let's give this a nice beauty pass render. Okay, there is the 2K render. And by the way, this 1:1, if you click it, that will show the true size of the 2K render, which is larger than your typical viewing area, so that's why it has this reserved number to resize it and click. There's a lot of detail there, so it's catching the edges of the feathers really nice, and the texture kind of beautifully in sections and in parts. So maybe I'll turn the hand and do one more kind of render. First, of course, I'm going to save that image. Save image. I'll name it Fantasy Hand Posed 1, and if you have time and want to do it, you can turn this as a bonus render, as I said. Okay, do another little test, and a little bit of an odd angle, but just having fun. I'll try that too. I turned up the subsurface here and the standard surface of Arnold, the material attached to the mesh, to get a little color variation of the way light is penetrating the tissues and the nails there a little bit. That's a really strange angle of the hand, but I really like it. It seems artistic, so I'm going to render that too at 2K. And there's the finished 2K render. Zooming into the 1:1 or 1:1, it has really interesting looking highlights picking up from the Arnold lighting situation. And some surprising, sometimes beautiful looking phenomenon and effects. And that will conclude the bonus video on rigging the hand in different poses and bonus renders if you like. And ultimately finishing the Fantasy Hands project. That's it.